By the year 1200, the leaders of the Norman invasion, like Strongbow, were dead. So too was the last High King of Ireland, Rory O'Connor, who had united the Irish against these invaders. But now the clans of County Wicklow, for example, like many around Ireland, were on their own. And today I'm visiting the mountain stronghold of two of these Wicklow clans. I'm here at the lost outpost of Castlekevin in County Wicklow, and it's typical of the challenges faced by the Anglo-Normans as they try to move inland. Some historians believe that a small market town may have existed here, but there was a problem, and it was with the Irish natives. By the malice and wantonness of the Irish of the mountains of Leinster, felons of the king, the English have been expelled and removed from their fortresses, manors and houses up to the present, and many of the said faithful subjects of the king have been slain by the Irish felons. The words of a Norman settler pleading for help from the Dublin authorities. One account tells that the Wicklow clans are reputed to be descended from a Spanish colony which established itself in Ireland about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, the descendants of which were the kings of Leinster. Caer More, or Charles the Great, was elevated from the throne of Leinster to reign over the entire country in 144 AD. It is from his grandson that the O'Byrnes, O'Tooles and O'Kavanaghs, the three main clans of Wicklow, are descended. The O'Byrnes occupied a northern part of Kildare stretching from Naas as far north as Maynooth. The O'Toole territory lay in southern Kildare and part of northern Wicklow. It was as a result of the Norman invasion that the two clans were driven off their lands and into the mountains of Wicklow. By 1202 they located themselves along the seaboard of Wicklow from Newtown Mount Kennedy to Arklow and up to Glenmalure. It was not long before the two clans, who appear to have forged alliances with each other through intermarriage, declared war on the new inhabitants, the Anglo-Normans. And just for the record, my maternal grandmother was an O'Toole and my paternal grandmother was an O'Byrne. So this is my home turf. Castlekevin's motte measures 70 metres from north to south by 46 metres from east to west. It is a rectangular platform with a level summit and rises 6 to 7 metres in height above the base of the ditch. In the centre of the eastern side is a projecting gate tower of uncourse rubble, and part of a corner tower survives at the north-east angle. So you can see here the slope going down into the moat itself, and then the ground rising up onto the motte itself. So this is a huge, challenging gradient for any type of invader. The bailey consists of a sub-rectangular area 143 metres from east to west and 67 metres from north to south. This is defined by a scarp or cut into the natural slope along the north and east sides. This is the area where archaeologists believe a settlement or town may have existed. So behind me you can see those trees, and that section was believed to have been a marshland, which would have made it very difficult for an attacker to cross, make it very slow. And of course we're up on rising ground here, and we can see any approaches through that ground in particular. So you can see here I'm standing in the base of the motte, and there's some stone structure behind me. It has fallen down, but all along here is some sort of wall, stone structure, which motte and baileys were generally made of as a wooden structure. So this is quite unique in many respects. Again, it's completely overgrown, so it's very, very difficult to see the exact outline. There's believed to be a gatehouse here, certainly. Very, very deep in here. It's quite deep in the base of this motte. You can see how high you'd have to scale to try and make any impression on this site. I've made a video on the construction and use of motte and bailey fortifications on this playlist. Castlekevin is located about 4 miles from the famous monastic city of Glendalough. The Archbishop of Dublin, the Norman Henry of London, took control of the Irish diocese of Glendalough and the lands of Castlekevin in 1216, making him one of the biggest landowners of Norman territory. In 1225, a weekly market was established here in the early years of Castlekevin's existence. So besides growing agricultural produce, historians believe that extensive forests in the area may have provided revenue for the Archbishop, and the great oak trees of Ireland were reputed to have made a huge contribution to the building of the Royal Navy over the centuries. It would seem that the area was relatively quiet for about 50 years until the local clans, excluded from this prosperity, grew in strength. Indeed, in 1276, the prior of the Knights Hospitallers, William Fitzroger, led an expedition against the clans into the valley of Glenmalure. It was a disastrous failure. Most of Fitzroger's forces, including numerous monks, were slaughtered, and the survivors, including the prior himself, were taken captive. The next year, the castle was heavily fortified, with a considerable sum of £348 being spent on provisions for the garrison. In my video on the Battle of Dublin in 1171, the Normans' skill in warfare and the use of cavalry and archers in the face of superior numbers was told. The late Irish historian G. A. Hayes McCoy summarises the Irish warrior as follows. In contrast, the Irish were poorly equipped, dilatory and too prone to the defensive. A few of their leaders may have had armour, but in general they had none. In general too they were infantry. They fought on foot with spears, javelins, battle axes and swords. The only item of their missile armoury of their opponents found worthy of mention were their stone hand slings. The attack of mailed horse could, on firm ground, overrun them, and against a combination of horse and archers, of shock and firepower, they were helpless. They behaved always as though they had plenty of time. Fortifications, then as for centuries afterwards, daunted them. So many Irish warriors went into battle in their bare feet, and modern reenactors have observed that you get a much better grip in your bare feet on a surface like grass. So if you're trying to push against something like a shield wall, you've got a much better grip. Sir Charles Oman, the military historian, believed that the Irish did not change their methods of fighting between the time of the Norman invasion and that of the new conquest of Queen Elizabeth the first 400 years later. They used, he said, the same arms and the same primitive tactics in the 16th century as they had used in the 12th. While their enemies progressed, they stood still. Other writers have agreed with him. So while weapons and tactics would change, the terrain did not. And the Irish made the best of it. So by cutting branches or hedgerows and laying trees into each other, like this hawthorn, impenetrable living walls could be made in the landscape. And this was known as plashing. The progress of the Normans through the woods of Ossory in 1169 was delayed by Magillapatrick, who cut trenches across the forest paths and threw up ramparts behind the trenches. He erected stockades of wattles on top of the ramparts, manned them with his fighting men, and fought the advancing Normans from behind these formidable defences. In order to keep the attackers to the paths and to prevent infiltration into the woods which might outflank him, Magillapatrick plashed the margins of the pathways in the approaches to his barriers. He made, that is, impenetrable hedgerows of undergrowth on either side by interweaving cut branches amid the growing shrubs and saplings. And so despite the formidable Norman fortifications and superior military equipment and tactics, a moving force of Normans could not easily deploy in such terrain and lost many men at these so-called passes. And as for Castlekevin today, a recent archaeological survey using aerial radar and ground radar failed to find the lost town in the Bailey area, although farmland nearby looked promising. Ultimately, Castlekevin is not ready to reveal its secrets yet. I filmed this shaky video in August 1991 at an O'Byrne Mass in their traditional stronghold of Glenmalure. My grandmother was the oldest O'Byrne attending this day, a people proud of their heritage. But like the great Irish wolfhound, their ancestors were gentle when stroked, but fierce when provoked. When you hear the words of the hard-pressed Hugh Lawless of 1316 at the beginning of this video, they have the sea between Wales and Ireland for a wall on one side, and the mountains of Leinster on the other, where the said Irish felons are. Castlekevin was razed by the O'Tooles in 1308, and the Norman garrison, or English as they were now known, were all slaughtered. For the next 300 years, Castlekevin, so remote yet so close to Dublin, would be taken and retaken by these forces, making more tales to come of the clans of Wicklow, who would keep marching on. Thanks for subscribing and thanks for watching.